Hello and welcome to Braver Leaders, the podcast. In this episode, I want to lay out some of the ideas that underpin the rationale behind creating this podcast and the episodes which will follow. So I've called it Braver Leaders. Now, this is not necessarily about running into a burning building and rescuing someone. Certainly, that's brave, and certainly it is to be applauded. And there may well be guests from time to time who can talk about the actual physical part of putting yourself in danger. And I'm looking forward to chatting to those people. However, for many of us, but not all of us, bravery can be different. It can be more about psychological bravery. It can be about speaking up, particularly when no one else is. It can be about doing the right thing when no one else is. It can be about doing something which is selfish, but it's not necessarily apparent that someone is doing that thing. In other words, they're not doing it for kudos or recognition or fame. They're doing it because it is the right thing. And who are those people? Well, as often as not, they're kind of hidden. And what I mean by that is we don't hear about them. We don't see them. And if you consider that there are apparently about 8 billion people on the planet, I mean, I haven't counted them, I don't know, but a lot of people, who are we exposed to in terms of role models, if I could call them that? People in positions of influence, people in the public eye. First of all, a tiny amount, a tiny percentage of that 8 billion. And also, how are they in terms of their behaviours? Would you consider them to be ethical, moral, someone that you would want to invite home, have dinner with? Well, you might want to do that anyway because they could be really entertaining. But are they the best role model for our societies, particularly our younger people who can be very impressionable? Some of them, no doubt, are. Although you may disagree and say, well, none are. I certainly don't think many are. So, I think in episodes to come, we'll talk about those people. We'll talk about that idea of the people who have immense power and what that means and what we should expect and maybe what we should demand. But we'll also talk about those people who, as I've suggested, can in many ways be invisible, because therein, I think, lies many a good role model. But we just don't hear about them because they're not famous. They may be well known in their area, in their town, in their sector, but they're not famous in the sense that, everybody would know them if they walked down the street. But these are the people that hold the fabric of our society together, or not, as the case may be. These are the people who are often doing good and being extremely resilient, and also helping when no one else would help, speaking up when no one else would speak up. And from those individuals, so-called ordinary people, I want to hear what they've got to say. What do they think about doing the right thing? What does that mean? What do they think about integrity? What do they think about resilience? What are they thinking when they stick their head above the parapet and no one else does? When they're the first person or one of the first people to speak up and say, hey, this is wrong. What are their tips for surviving in this ever-changing and often quite worrying world? What do they think we should be doing in terms of leader selection, promotion, development? Because I'm interested in that as well. It just seems to me that there's a disconnect. There's a disconnect from people that we're told are leaders and who actually are. Because if you look around, you may be forgiven for thinking that pretty much everyone in a position of authority seems to care only about themselves and may be, in some situations, actually quite corrupt. You may be forgiven for thinking that we don't seem to have any decent people to choose from. You may be forgiven for thinking that it's like that everywhere, that every business, every institution is in some ways highly flawed, and certainly the people at the top are. But when you move your focus a little bit and turn a camera around, you can find that even in some big corporations, but certainly in my experience, smaller corporations, smaller businesses, communities, the aforementioned institutions, there are people who are doing tremendous things, and they can come in all shapes and sizes and from every walk of life. And they have intriguing stories to tell, inspiring stories to tell. There is much, I believe, to learn from them. I want to highlight them. I want us to recognize that although at times things out there can seem bleak, can indeed seem hopeless, in fact, these are the people that we see in the spotlight. The majority are not like that. We can imagine that everyone is selfish. I believe the majority of people are not. I believe that we just don't hear about them because they are the so-called silent majority. They're not blowing their own trumpet. They're not out there telling you what they've done, but they're doing it. And they do it consistently. What's that old phrase about integrity? Integrity is doing the right thing when no one else is looking. And compare that to some of the so-called leaders who are around. They remotely think they're doing anything that looks remotely like the right thing. Well, there's a big fanfare. Whilst other people, the real people, are getting on with it. And that brings me on to this other little distinction I want to make between positional leadership and self-leadership. I believe it starts with us. We've got to understand ourselves and lead ourselves properly, manage ourselves, whether that's emotional regulation or indeed being ethical and moral. We've got to get that right first before we can fully impact people in a positive way. And so I want to explore that. I hope you will agree that it's a fairly wide but interesting set of, let's call them, little areas to explore. Let's call them little compartments that we can peek in and sit down and have a conversation in. And also, I hope as time goes on, you will notice that so many of them link to each other. These little compartments are, in fact, all resonating together. And once you get enough of them resonating at the right frequency, then you can move mountains. You can change so much. Whole organizations, communities, and hopefully societies. So join me if you possibly can. And I hope also enjoy the forthcoming episodes. Bye for now.